Good afternoon, and welcome to our discussion of the Eurozone. I'm Eli Van Bell.
I'm Karin Queener.
I'm Gianna Baez.
I'm Ina Bakioki.
And I'm Matilda Van Lieferinga.
And before we begin our discussion of high debt and deficit in Italy, we'd first like to address the economic situation of the Eurozone as a whole. Karin, let's begin with you.
Thanks, Eli. The Eurozone is growing once again after 2 consecutive years of negative real GDP growth. In 2014, the GDP growth rate was 0.9%, and that's expected to rise to 1.4% in 2015. So while these numbers are less than ideal, they're moving in the right direction.
This growth was largely driven by Germany, the region's largest economy, which grew by 0.7% in the last quarter of 2014. Some nations, such as Greece and Italy, however, continue to struggle.
As shown on slide 3, unemployment is declining but still high at 11.3% in the Eurozone. On the bright side, it has reached its lowest point since April 2012 and is projected to continue to decline to 10.6% in 2016.
Of course, unemployment rates vary widely across Eurozone nations. The lowest rates of unemployment are currently in Germany and Austria at just under 5%, while the highest rates are in Greece at 25.7% and Spain at 23.7%.
As slide 4 shows, youth unemployment has decreased from 24.3% to 22.9%, but it's still particularly troubling. This is not much solace to nations like Greece and Spain, where youth unemployment is over 50%. If young people can't find work, they can't acquire necessary skills, they may fall into debt, they often can't leave home, they don't have enough money to spend. All of these factors contribute to sluggish economic growth.
Good point, Matilda. And high unemployment in general means that there is still excess capacity in the economy and room for growth. Economic growth is crucial to bring down unemployment rates and put the Eurozone on a firm path to recovery.
As we can see on slide 5, inflation is still well below the European Central Bank's target rate of 2%, but still under 2%. Inflation right now is at negative 0.1% and is projected to rise to 1.6% in 2016. We expect to see a rise in prices as the economic situation improves and wages rise.
And adding on to that, as we see in slide 6, the euro's depreciation against many major foreign currencies, particularly the dollar, has driven up import prices. This could boost inflation a bit. The European Central Bank estimates that a 10% depreciation in the value of the euro gives annual GDP in the Eurozone an approximately 0.4% boost and raises inflation by 0.6%.
Although the Eurozone is not out of the woods yet, I'm optimistic for 2015. The European Central Bank's policy of quantitative easing, low oil prices, and strong domestic demand will drive this recovery.
And the banking system has been much more stable than in recent years. This, in conjunction with the ECB's measures, could help for improved conditions to lending to households and businesses. This will thus increase investment and consumption and drive growth.
There are also positive developments globally that can support Eurozone economic growth. The continued strength of the U.S. economy in particular will help the Eurozone. The strong dollar should boost Eurozone exports to the United States. Emerging economies are stabilizing as well. This bodes well for Eurozone trade.
All right, well, thank you all for your input. Now we'll move to the problem of high debt and deficit, which has plagued the Eurozone for years. High debt, as you all well know, can cause many problems for a country, since countries finance their debt with their debt with bonds, and in a weak economy, the price of financing goes up, which effectively makes the debt more expensive to fund. A deficit can exacerbate the situation by adding on to the debt.
Yes, Eli. Italy is a prime example of these problems as it has struggled with high debt since the late 1980s, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight for their issues. Many components contribute to their high debt, such as their high unemployment and difficulties with tax evasion. On top of that, its economy, which is the third largest in the Eurozone, will continue to shrink for the third year in a row now. It also has a rapidly aging population, which puts stress on pensions and thus those who must support them.
In fact, Italy has over 2 trillion euros in public debt. Its budget deficit in 2014 was equivalent to 3% of its GDP. Its government debt to GDP ratio was at 132.1% at the end of 2014.
One of the biggest contributors to high debt and deficit is a stagnant economy. As shown in slide 8, Italy is currently experiencing lethargic GDP growth. The last quarter of 2014 saw a growth rate of 0%, and this marked the 5th consecutive quarter without GDP growth. Previously, the growth had all been negative.
You're right, Karin. Italy's economy isn't doing so great right now. Italy is currently under artificial support, and thus the ECB and the long-term refinancing operation program have given it over 268 billion euros of liquidity.
Germany, one of two other countries that are central to the Eurozone economy, has grown by 1.6% in the past year. Italy, however, contracted by 0.5%. Although Italy is very important to the Eurozone, its economy has underperformed.
Despite the fact that Italy has the second largest industrial sector in the Eurozone, its industrial production is down by 24%. In the third quarter of 2014, Italy's exports failed to offset weak domestic demands and falling investments, which then decreased their total tax intake and therefore added to their high deficit.
On a brighter side, private investment has improved slightly. In 2014, investors purchased 5.5 billion euros worth of property, up from the 5 billion purchased in 2013. This shows modest growth in the investment sector.
That's true, Gianna, and ever since Italy experienced the financial crisis in 2008, it's lost over 31,000 companies. Investments are down by 27.8%. All these declining numbers have caused Italy to raise taxes and cut spending and borrow even more money, thus adding to their overall debt.
Slide 9 shows that the unemployment rate in Italy is one of the greatest contributors to high debt and deficit. It's now at 12.7%. Along with increasing unemployment, Italy has seen declines in the number of hours worked per week and labor force participation rate. Currently, only 55.6% of Italy's population is employed. This contrasts drastically with the Eurozone average of 63.8%.
As seen on slide 10, youth unemployment is declining but is still very high at 41.2%. There's a gap between overprotected workers with open-ended contracts and younger people with no job security. At this rate, in 15 years, Italy will experience a 1-to-1 ratio of workers and non-workers.
High unemployment affects high debt and deficit because it not only decreases tax intake, but also increases the amount of people who need support from the government.
As we move on to slide 11, we see that tax evasion, which many other countries in the Eurozone struggle with, is another major problem that contributes to Italy's problems with high debt and deficits. In 2014, only 22% of Italians paid 22% of Italians paid sales tax, and 31.4% reported their corporate taxes.
Some Italians hide their money abroad in countries such as Switzerland, which holds more than 70% of Italy's hidden money. This unreported money costs Italy about 90 billion euros a year, consequently deepening their debt.
Their intake could be higher if they collected all the taxes that are owed to them. However, this can be a difficult problem due to inefficient enforcement.
Good point, Ina. Another tax issue is that, as we see in slide 12, income taxes in Italy is still very high. Italians in the highest tax bracket must pay 47.9% of their income in taxes, which is more than 10% higher than the US's tax rate for the same bracket. This probably contributes to the number of Italians who evade their taxes.
Adding on to the tax difficulties is a very complicated tax system. Italy offers many tax exemptions, and exemptions were actually 8% of GDP. This, along with other loopholes, make it harder for the Italian government to enforce tax collection.
And taxes aren't their only problem. As we see on slide 13, like many other countries in the Eurozone, Italy's aging population depresses its economic situation even further.
Europe's population has steadily been increasing over the past few years. With the influx of retired people, Italy will have to find ways to support them while not increasing its deficits. They must also find ways to make up on income loss on tax credit for people with dependent relatives. In 2014, they gave out 10.4 billion euros in tax breaks for those with dependent relatives, and this will only increase.
That's true. This is exacerbated by the fact that Italy has the third oldest population in the world, behind Germany and Japan. In 2014, its average age was 45.6 years old, and this is expected to rise to 50 years old in 2050. Also, life expectancy is expected to increase, adding even more possible strain on the working population.
Yes, and along with the greater population of older people, the birth rate in Italy is plummeting. In 2014, fewer babies were born than in any other year since the Italian state formed in 1861. There were 1.4 children born per woman. This further puts stress on the issue of the younger working population being unable to support the retired population, and stress on the government as they must support this retired population through health care benefits.
So given all these challenges, we'll now turn to slide 14 and talk about possible solutions. What reforms can Italy implement to alleviate their situation?
Well, the European Central Bank's recent initiative of quantitative easing has increased Italy's export potential by driving down the value of the euro. The fall in oil prices has also been welcome news. To add on, as sovereign bond yields fall, the interest cost on Italy's debt will follow. These are all positive developments, but Italy should look more towards long-term solutions.
Italy faces a dilemma in addressing this issue. It could take a path of fiscal consolidation and raise taxes and cut spending. While this seems like the obvious path, it could result in negative consequences for the Italian economy, possibly even worsening their high unemployment and slow growth situations.
Karin's right. Fiscal consolidation in this macroeconomic environment would be self-defeating. I think Italy's best bet is to first reevaluate its budget and remove any unnecessary spending. After the budget is compacted and revised, any money spent on non-growth friendly programs will be directed towards fiscal expansionary programs.
I agree, Ina, but we must be careful. If Italy neglects its high debt and deficits, this could also be self-defeating, as investors would be just worried about an unstable fiscal situation as they would be about a weak labor market.
I think Italy should take action now in light of the European Central Bank's recent initiative to create structural reforms. In fact, Prime Minister Renzi's new coalition aims to keep the fiscal gap just inside European Union limits, and he plans to benefit from the lower debt servicing costs. At the same time, Italy should invest in research and development, education, and infrastructure. These will not only create jobs, but will make Italy more productive for their future.
Although I think those are all good points, I for one actually believe that Italy needs to continue to help small businesses in terms of hiring and investment. Right now, firms can hire up to 20% of their workforce on fixed-term contracts for up to 3 years. And thanks to government efforts, electricity prices have fallen for small and medium-sized businesses. This is an example of growth-friendly reforms that directly translate to economic growth and greater productivity.
Besides promoting economic growth, Italy needs to get a better handle on taxation. Italy and Switzerland have signed an agreement to exchange information on funds hidden in Swiss bank accounts, which will make it harder for Italians to hide their assets. It also allows for voluntary disclosure, in which Italians can repatriate their assets, but only pay taxes on funds hidden in the past 5 years.
Another way Italy is fixing its high debt and deficit issue is through making taxation easier through the use of pre-filled income tax returns. This should cut down on tax administration costs.
On another note, Italy can do more domestically to combat tax evasion. First, having an efficient budget will decrease the need to increase tax revenue, and the government can then afford to provide tax breaks for company and store owners. It can also boost tax collection and enforcement efforts by redirecting from otherwise non-expansionary programs. Finally, economic growth boosts tax revenues. Increased revenue can be used to close the deficit and thus reduce the national debt.
Economic growth and job opportunity will also encourage immigration and make young people want to stay in Italy and build their lives. A strong economy can have a long-term positive impact on the demographic trends in Italy.
And on that note, we will close our discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I will start with 2 general questions, and then we'll turn to more specific questions about your presentation. First question. 9 countries in the European Union are not in the euro area. Are these countries likely to take the necessary steps to adopt the euro as their currency? Why or why not?
Well, in the European Union, there are actually some countries that have denounced the possibility of joining the Eurozone, excuse me. So I know this because Britain is one, and they decided to not actually join the European Union. But because they decided not to join the European Union, they're missing out on the benefits of a single monetary policy. So some of the benefits are actually that it becomes easier to trade and it's easier for travel. So just because they have a different currency, besides they have their own currency, the pound, and since anybody trading or traveling to England actually needs to change over their currency, there's problems because the currency exchange rate is always changing because so there's always uncertainties when companies in one country of the Eurozone trade with Britain, so there's discrepancies there. And you guys want to add?
Yeah. Because the Eurozone hasn't been doing as well as it would like, there's certain countries that there has been talk about certain countries also leaving the Eurozone, like for example, Greece. And this sets a precedent for other countries because it suggests a failure of leadership of the European Central Bank and the Eurozone in general to be able to control the countries under the single currency of the euro. And if the European Union institutions can't find a way to manage this, other countries will see this as a reason maybe to opt out and not join, as opposed to maybe joining because it would put more stress maybe on their economy rather than helping them if they were under the single currency.
Thank you. Then the euro has recently declined against the dollar. It was $1.38 worth last year, and now it's 1.12. What effects might this change have on the euro area economy as a whole?
Well, when the euro becomes cheaper against the dollar, that means that European exports are also cheaper, and so more people are likely to buy them. This can help GDP because it improves how much they can export, and so overall it can have a positive effect on both GDP growth and then exports.
Also, also since the euro depreciating and the US dollar is gaining strength on the euro, this will make it more optimal to travel to Europe and travel to the Eurozone countries. And this will help promote consumer spending because of all the tourism in a lot of the countries there.
Just to add on, the Eurozone and the US economy, they have a strong bond, so if the US does well, then the Eurozone will also do well and vice versa.
One of your solutions is to prosecute tax evaders and collect on those taxes owed to the country. What do you estimate the cost of that would be, and would it balance out with the gain that you would get in tax receipts? And also, would there be other uses for that money if it's significant?
Right now, like we said in one of our solutions, that Italy is losing about 70 billion euros in taxes, and this is a huge blow to the Italy economy because that money can be spent on more efficiently and progressively. For example, one of our solutions would be to invest in research and development, which will have a better impact on the growth of the Italian economy. It could create jobs, and thus the creation of jobs will lead to more tax intake each year.
Sure. To clarify my question, it was more about how much it would cost in terms of the court system of prosecuting those tax evaders and the length of time it would take to catch them, and whether that is a good trade-off for the money lost through tax receipts.
Well, I know that when Renzi came into office, one of his reforms he promised Italy was to reform the slow-moving justice system, which has to do with the combating tax evasion. And this reform would bode well, as we mentioned in our script, that they do have this plan with Switzerland in order to help tax evasion and in order to decrease tax evasion. So if more attention was paid to these tax evasion issues, it would help the economy, as it would reduce the money that they lose in tax, but it wouldn't make up for the money that they still owe in their debt in accordance to their GDP ratio. So that's one of the things they can do, but it wouldn't necessarily overall affect the economy as much as they want to in order to grow.
You mentioned, and I think correctly, the problems Italy has of both high debt and low growth, and you've also highlighted the benefits Italy is getting as the ECB pushes interest rates down in terms of its debt servicing cost. If you had only one choice, either to use the benefits of lower debt servicing costs to pay down debt, or to use it to do things like R&D and a couple of other things you mentioned to boost growth, which one would you choose and why?
We think Italy should focus now on its growth, so spending more efficient elements like investing in research and development, education, infrastructure, so that more people can be employed, and then later they'll focus on their debt.
And to add on to that, if Italy invests in research and development and its GDP grows, that will also in turn reduce its debt to GDP ratio because the GDP will be larger, so it will help that issue in the long run too.
Just to follow up on that, is high debt a bigger or a smaller problem in a low inflation environment?
Well, inflation. All right. Sorry, can you repeat your question real quick?
You said that you spent time saying that inflation was very low currently and even below zero.
Yeah.
Does it make paying off debt easier or more cumbersome?
It makes it more cumbersome just because if the economy had inflation, then basically that means there's a general rise in prices. So that means wages and just the overall tax increase or tax revenue that the government would get would increase. So this would effectively make the debt easier to fund. So it makes it more cumbersome when there isn't inflation, and it makes it really a problem when there's deflation, because that means the price is going down, and that means that they have to effectively give more money to pay off the same amount of debt.
The Greek finance minister, Varoufakis, has recently said that he thought Italian debt was unsustainable, that it would never be able to actually pay it off. I mean, would you agree with him?
Well, debt can never really be at 0%, but a good goal would be to control it and manage it properly. And Italy is just spending more and more on inefficient programs. So we think they should spend it smartly, and then they can grow their GDP.
And also, it's not really about if the debt gets more expensive. It's more about how they manage their debt and how they're able to sustain it throughout. So if Italy, like we said, can find a way to spend their money more wisely, this would then allow for the managing of debt, and this would grow their GDP, and the ratio gets better. So maybe they wouldn't necessarily be able to fully compensate for that debt, but they want to be able to get to the point where they reach the ECB's target of 60% of their GDP for debt.
One of the things that the EU has been doing is quantitative easing. Would Italy benefit from that stimulus, and if so, how would it?
Yes, Italy would benefit from quantitative easing because quantitative easing affects the whole of the Eurozone because it's implemented by the European Central Bank. And this generally makes interest rates lower. So pushing down interest rates makes it it basically makes it a better time for investors and consumers to take out loans from banks because the lower interest rates make it basically cheaper to take out money. So at this time, the lower interest rates would hopefully increase GDP growth just because more people are making big purchases, and this helps GDP.
Okay, time is up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.